Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into part 5 of Dogman, Bigfoot, Werewolf, and Wildman historic experiences in the media, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And last but not least, if you'd really like to help this channel to continue to grow and go, just simply subscribe and click the like button. It's fast and free. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's second half. Shall we? So, like I've done in the past, what we will do is source where the original article was posted in, then the title, and then the body. So, source. The Fort Wayne Daily Democrat, Indiana, USA, December 11th, 1869. A wild man in Dakota, Big Sioux, Dakota, December 11th, 1869. We are indebted to Mr. Thompson, who resides on the Dakota side of the Big Sioux, about 15 miles northwest of this city, for the particulars of the facts which we are about to narrate. About 1 month since, a farmer named Evans, who resides a few miles north of Mr. Thompson, was engaged in hauling firewood from the timber of the Big Sioux, when he was startled by seeing what at first glance appeared to be some wild animal bound up from the hollow log, but a few yards from where he was standing, a close observation of the object, while it was decamping, satisfied Mr. Evans that it was a wild man. He immediately made pursuit, but it rapidly with which the wild man ran, aided by the thickness of the woods, delivered him out of either sight or reach. Mr. Evans shortly afterward returned home and informed his neighbors of his adventure and what he had seen. A small party of roll-mounted men started the next day on the trail of this wild man. The party first ransacked the woods in the neighborhood in a secluded spot, entirely obscured from ordinary observation by the thickness of the underbrush. They discovered a fissure between two rocks. This fissure penetrated into the rocks about 8 feet. On the top was a large lot of underbrush, limbs of trees, and several pieces of portions of hides and animals. There were no indication that there had been a fire kindled anywhere near the place, but from the pieces of rags, long grass, and other matter found on the ground, they were satisfied that it was habitation of a wild man. Not being able to see anything of the object of their search, they went to their homes. A few days after, another party of horsemen started out on that same mission of their predecessors, and with more satisfactory results. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, while following up a ravine a few miles from the place where the strange being was first discovered, the party was attracted by the barking of one of their dogs. Immediately afterward, the wild man crossed an open space closely followed by 2 of the dogs. The man put spurs to their horses and for a short distance gained rapidly on the object of their search. But, coming to a deep ravine or gully skirted on either side by underbrush, their progress was impeded, and during the delay caused by getting out of their situation, the man escaped. Since that time, he has not been seen. We understand that a party of gentlemen from this city proposed starting out in a few days for the purpose of catching this man, or rather nondescript, dead or alive. We hope that no effort will be spared to take him alive and uninjured. From a conversation with Mr. Thompson, we learn that his singular being is entirely covered with a seemingly heavy coat of dark-colored hair, that he is as agile as a cat and as fleet as a deer. Old settlers in the region where the wild man has been seen state that about 27 years since a Frenchman and his wife and 3 children settled upon that piece of land on the banks of the Big Sioux. At that time, the only occupants of this section consisted of Indians, who were the sole owners of Dakota, some half-breeds, and a few French settlers, most of whom took squaw for their wives. It is related that the Frenchman we have alluded to did not live agreeably with his family, that his affections were lavished upon a dusky daughter of an Indian chief, that the white wife learned of this, praised her husband for the symptoms of his yearning, and that one morning a friendly Indian visited the home of the Frenchman, discovered the dead bodies of the wife and children lying on the floor. An investigation discovered the fact that the throat of the woman had been cut from ear to ear. The children had been clubbed to death by blows on the head with a stock of a gun or similar weapon. No clue to who the murderer was. The Frenchman has never been seen in this county since. The supposition now is that he had committed a triple murder, that, reflecting on the horror of his crime, he became insane, took to the woods, and resides there since, and that the wild man that has been lately seen and the French settler of 27 years since is one and the same. It is well known that many years since the majority of Indians who resided in the Big Sioux Valley were, on account of the scarcity of game, compelled to go further west, and as it is only within the last few years of this section of country alluded to has become settled, it was very possible for a man to live there without being discovered or any person knowing his whereabouts. The whole affair is wrapped up in such a singular mystery that we refrain from comment or surmise until we can speak intelligently on the subject. Source: Antioch Ledger, California, USA, October 16th, 1869. Mysterious creature seen playing with fire. Stanislaus County, California, fall of 1869. A hunter reported an unusual incident in local mountains involving a hair-covered man-like creature who amused himself with a campfire. He was later joined by another of his species as he left the campsite. The remarkable account is proved here in the hunter's own words. I was hunting in the mountains about 20 miles south of here and camped 5 or 6 days in one place, as I have done every season for the past 15 years. Several times I returned to camp after a hunt and saw that the ashes and charred sticks from the fireplace had been scattered about. An old hunter notices such things and very soon gets curious to know the cause. Although my bedding and traps and little stores were not disturbed, as I could see, I was anxious to learn who or what it was that so regularly visited my camp, for clearly the half-burnt sticks and cinders would not scatter themselves about. I saw no tracks near the camp, as the hard-covered ground with leaves would show none. So I started in a circle around the place, and 300 yards off in damp sand I struck the track of a man's foot, as I supposed bare and immense in size. Now I was curious, sure, and I resolved to lie for the barefooted visitor. I accordingly took a position on the hillside about 60 or 70 feet from the fire and securely hid in the bush. I waited and watched 2 hours and more. I sat there and wondered if the owner of the feet would come again, and whether he imagined what an interest he had created in my inquiring mind, and finally what possessed him to be prowling about there with no shoes. My fireplace was on my right, and the spot where I saw the track was on my left, hid by the brush. It was in this direction my attention was mostly directed, thinking the visitor would appear there, and beside it was easier to sit and face that way. Suddenly I was surprised by a shrill whistle such as boys produce with 2 fingers under their tongue, and turning quickly, I ejaculated, "Good God!" as I saw the object of my solicitude, standing beside my fire, erect, and looking suspiciously around. It was in the image of a man, but it could not have been a human. It was never so benumbed with astonishment before. The creature, whatever it was, stood fully 5 feet high and disproportionately broad and square at the foreshoulders, with arms of great length. The legs were very short and the body long. The head was small compared to the rest of the creature, and appeared to be set upon his shoulders without a neck. The whole was covered in a dark brown and cinnamon-colored hair, quite long on some parts, that on the head standed in shock and growing close down to the ears, like a digger Indian. As I looked, he threw his head back and whistled again, and then stopped and grabbed a stick from the fire. This he swung around until the fire on the end had gone out. When he repeated the maneuver, I was dumb, almost, and could not look. 15 minutes I sat and watched him as he whistled and scattered my fire about. I could easily have put a bullet through his head, but why should I kill him? Having amused himself, apparently, as he desired, with my fire, he started to go. And, having gone a short distance, he returned, and was joined by another, a female, unmistakably, when both turned and walked past me within 20 yards of where I sat, and disappeared in the brush. I could not have had a better opportunity for observing him, as they were unconscious of my presence. Their only object of visiting my camp seemed to amuse themselves with swinging lighted sticks around. I have shared this story many times since, and it has often raised an incredulous smile. But I have met one person who has seen a mysterious creature, and a dozen of whom come across tracks at various places between here and Pico Pass. Fast forward, the hunter actually provided this report to the newspaper in November 1870. He was remarking on a reported accounts of previous sightings of a similar creature. He prefaced his report with the following: "I saw in your paper a short time since an item concerning the gorilla which was said to have been seen at Crow Canyon, and shortly after in the mountains of Oristimba Creek. You sneered at the idea of there being such a critter in these hills. And were I not better informed, I should sneer too, or else conclude that one of your recent prospecting party had gotten lost in the wilderness and did not have sense enough to find their way back to Terry's. I positively assure you that this gorilla or wild man, or whatever you choose to call it, is no myth. I know that it exists, and that there are at least 2 of them, having seen both at once not a year ago. Their existence has been reported at times for the past 20 years, and I have heard it said in early days an orangutan escaped from a ship on the southern coast. But the creature I have seen is not that animal. And if it is, where did it get its mate? Import her as a webbed foot? Did their wives?" Source: Marge Davenport, 1963. Amazing Things Found in Hunt for Truth About Mount St. Helens Apes. The Journal Washington, USA, 1963. From a story uncovered by Davenport and other journal investigators. Strange animal suspect in disappearance of brothers, Mount St. Helens, 1860s. Shroud of mystery surrounds the disappearance of 2 Burgoyne brothers who, along with a 3rd brother, established Copper, Maine, near Grizzly Lake about 2 years ago. The 3 put forth a great deal of effort in building a sturdy cabin at the site so that one of them could winter there to protect their claim. When the other 2 returned in the spring, they found that the cabin had been broken into, and it was evident that a terrific struggle had taken place. But There was no sign of the lone brother. He had kept a diary, and they saw he had recorded sightings of a strange, hairy animal in the area. I don't know what kind of animal they are, he wrote, although he was reputed to have been well acquainted with bear, elk, deer, and other wild animals. The two remaining brother carried on with their claim, and again one stayed for the winter. When the third returned, the same thing was seen, and again no sign of the brother who had remained. The last brother left the area and never returned. Fast forward, there is still evidence that a Burgoyne or one of the Burgoynes did actually have a claim in the area. What is left of the mine is called Burgoyne Mine. A lake is called Burgoyne Snow Lake, and a few logs are left, 1963, of what is believed to have been the cabin. Source: Otto Ernest Rayburn, 1941, Ozark County. Giant hairy wild man captured, Saline County, Arkansas, 1860s. The 7-foot-tall hairy wild man, who has seen many times in the mountains, has been captured, although he has not harmed anyone. He was greatly feared, so a party was organized to capture him. A daring young man led the group with a pack of deerhounds. The wild man was tracked to a cave and lassoed with a rope. When the lariat noose fell over his shoulders, he emitted a strange sound like that of a trapped animal. He was taken to Banton and lodged in jail. A small building made of logs, he immediately tore from his body the clothing provided by the captors. He is said to be of white race, but covered with long, thick hair. The creature escaped from the flimsy jail, but was recaptured, this time in the cane brakes. Just how long it remained in custody or what became of it is unknown. Source: Titusville, Morning Herald, Pennsylvania, USA, August 1st, 1870. A wild man in the mountains, northwestern Nevada, August 1st, 1870. Northwestern Nevada has its sensation just now over a lost or wild man who has been discovered in the mountains of that country. A party went in search of him recently and succeeded in getting a sight of him and finding his habitation, but not in capturing him. He is described as being undoubtedly a white man about 40 years of age, nearly covered by a coat of fine long hair, and not at all startling in appearance, and from the set of soldier buttons found in his cave is supposed to have been a lost Fremont command. About 1846, the searching party had just picketed their horses for that night when he made his appearance, and with a roar attacked the horses in a perfect frenzy of madness, driving them down the mountain and ending the pursuit only after a 5-mile chase, when one of the horses had been disabled by a fall down the precipice and was mangled by him in a fearful manner. Source: The New York Herald, New York, USA, July 22nd, 1870. A wild man in Nevada. Description of him by an eyewitness. He is supposed to be one of the lost men of Fremont's expedition, a characteristic sensation of the Plains, Nevada, July 1st, 1870. Correspondence. The people inhabiting the northwest part of Nevada are at present in an intense state of excitement over a supposed discovery of the trace of habitation of a lost or wild white man. Rumor had located it upon a high and densely wooded mountain near the Utah line. And after gathering all the information that we could, we armed and equipped ourselves for a trip to the location described, about 50 miles from our camp at the sink of Deep Creek. After a tiresome ride of 2 days over the mountains and through one of the wildest and roughest regions of this wild and rough country, we came in sight of and camped near the eastern slope of the mountain. All were now upon the quivine for some sight of the strange inhabitant. We had just picketed our animals and sat by the fire telling strange experiences of frontier life when we were aroused by a crashing sound caused by the swift approach of something strange-looking body coming toward our camp. Just at this moment, the moon shone through the clouds, almost as brilliant as the sun at noonday. We had a splendid view of the object. It is undoubtedly a white man about 40 years of age, nearly covered in a coat of fine long hair, in an appearance otherwise not at all startling. He carried in his right hand a huge club, and in his left a rabbit or some other small animal. He caught sight of us almost instantly as the moon shone out, and with a scream like a roar of a lion, brandished his club, dashed past the camp, and attacked the horses in a perfect frenzy of madness. We at this time could have shot him, but for the surprise of the moment, and ere we were armed, our animals stampeded, and he was after them like the wind down the mountain. We endeavored in vain and sent out our dogs after him, which, began savage and well trained, we had counted upon to assist in the capture. But with distended eyes they sat mutely gazing in the darkness, and neither blow nor kindness could move them to chase, and the only resource we had was to throw up a hasty rampart of logs and then station guards to prevent a surprise by the infuriated demon. Occasionally, through the long watch of night, all hands were aroused by his terrible cries, and thus, in momentary expectation of an attack, we passed the night. Morning dawned at last, and not one would leave the camp until the rosy sunlight cheered the landscape, when we took the trail of our horses, after having securely hidden our accoutrements and provisions, except a lunch for a few days' journey. They had torn down the mountain at terrific speed for about 5 miles. Here they jumped down a sheer precipice about 25 feet, disabling my saddle horse. He was lying near the bottom, mangled in my shocked manner. The wild man had evidently vented his rage upon my disabled horse, as large strips of skin were torn off and thrown to some distance. His lower jaw was broken. We shot him to end his suffering. The wild man had here given up the pursuit. About 2 miles further down the valley, we found the rest of our stock quietly grazing. The only marks they bore were evidently made by being caught by the tails by the wild man in the chase, entirely stripping some of them of their hair and skin. We now had some 6 miles to go to reach our camp. Arriving there at 3 o'clock when we took lunch, after examining our arms, we started in the direction from which the wild man approached, and were fortunate enough to strike his trail. With the well-defined footprints of a man who would wear a number 9 shoe, but being very broad on the bottom, we followed his trail for about 3 miles, when the gorge opened into a beautiful basin, and a half a mile further the trail ended abruptly at the entrance, and a dime dated 1841. Abruptly at the entrance of a cave. We explored the cave, finding a set of soldier buttons and a dime dated 1841, which leads me to the conclusion that he is the lost man from Fremont's company in 1846, or near that time. Source: New York Times, New York, USA, August 7th, 1870. A wild man discovered near New Hampton, New York. New York, August 7th, 1870. A wild man has been discovered near New Hampton, Orange County, who is creating quite the excitement in the vicinity. A few days ago, a party of gentlemen were out shooting along the Big Ditch, a stream which follows through the town, when their attention was attracted by a strange being in a nude state, with long hair and a wild appearance, who appeared to be a man who had been running wild for some time, and who probably had been living in the mountains. He was apparently busy in the destruction of frogs and snakes, And when he observed the party, he set up a fierce yell and fled for the woods. A small party gave chase, but was unable to ascertain his whereabouts. He has since been seen by several of the citizens of Dolsontown, but manages to keep away at a distance. It is probable that he is an escaped lunatic. Source: Ledger Antioch, California, USA, October 1st, 1870. Gorillas seen in California, Stanislaus County, California, September 1870. An item appeared in San Joaquin Republican the other day, stating that a wild man had been seen in some parts of San Joaquin County. And we afterward noticed the statement copied into several other papers with brief comments indicating disbelief in the report. We must confess to a want of credibility on our part also as the exact correctness of the item at the time. But we were yesterday placed in possession of certain information which leads us to believe that there may be some foundation to the report, as our columns are somewhat crowded this morning. We will give the reports as we receive them as briefly as possible. F.J. Hildreth and Samuel DeGrout of Washington Corners in this county, while out hunting on Oris Timbers Creek in Stanislaus County, about 3 weeks ago discovered footprints along the bank of the creek resembling the impressions of human beings' feet. Mr. Hildreth, who gave us the information, states that the tracks were like those of a human being, with the exception that the impressions of the toes were much larger. Hildreth afterward became separated from his companion, and upon proceeding some distance up the creek, saw a few yards ahead of him what he believed to be gorillas. If the description Mr. Hildreth was given us of these animals is true, he is certainly warranted in believing them to be that species of animal. Mr. DeGroot also reports that he saw the same objects and is positive that they are gorillas. The appearances of these strange animals in that neighborhood is notorious, and that they are gorillas is firmly believed by a great many people in the vicinity. A number of old hunters have started out to capture them, and we are promised whatever further facts may occur as soon as the party returns. The above we gathered from various parties, and whether true or not, there are many persons in the neighborhood of the Washington Corners who firmly believe that the animals referred to are verifiably gorillas. Source: The Republican, San Joaquin, California, September 19th, 1870. Wild man seen, but eludes capture. Crow Canyon, California, September 1870. We learn from a good authority that a wild man has been seen at Crow Canyon near Mount Diablo. Several attempts have been made to capture him, but as yet have proven unsuccessful. His tracks measured 13 inches. All right, guys, there is part 5 of Dogman. Bigfoot, Werewolf, and Wildman. Historic experiences in the media. Wow. Man, these are just so cool. I'm really loving them. I just think it's fascinating how humanity as a whole have evolved with our writing and how we deal with certain things. We still are kind of crude in that manner, but oh well. With that, I want to thank you all for listening and thank you all for your support. May the Great Spirit watch over us all. May He guide us down that path that we call life.